My father was the one who pushed me to be a veterinarian because he thought I was smart enough to be a doctor, but did not think we could overcome the socioeconomic barriers in the South and wasn't sure enough to push me to be an MD. My mother had different ideas, but didn't say it. And I think she secretly hoped that I would just naturally rise, and I mean the word in elevation, to a more glorious degree, in her opinion. And I remember my veterinary mentor, Dr. Roland Powell, right after I graduated, he claims he met her in the grocery store right after, and said, "You must be so proud of your son." And she said, "I am." She said, "I just wish he had become a real doctor."
Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Philip Nelson.
Good to see you again, my friend. And you, how is life?
Life sucks, but then you die. So I guess it's pretty good.
Happy almost Mother's Day.
I know.
Let's talk about mothers.
What do you want to say about your mother?
Listen, my mom died too young. I wish my mom were here to see. First of all, my kids were really young when she died. They were 3 and 5. And so they didn't get all the benefits that I got. And even then...
How old were you?
I was 41, 42, 1999. So
okay, wow. And you said your kids were young when she died.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
My kids were young when she died, so they have very limited memories except for pictures and the like.
They would know her as a grandmother, even
Correct.
then, right?
Correct. Right.
There is a poignant difference.
Absolutely. Yes. Grandparents can return the kids.
When it's time for discipline, they can pass.
Yes, exactly. But they never really had to deal with that because they were so little at that point in time. And not only that, I mean, some of the other challenges were that my parents lived in New York and I was in Southern California, so they didn't see them on a regular basis. That's the grandmother side of it. On the mother's side of it, it was like, my mother was very influential because she was a biology teacher. And so I grew up in a very academically focused environment. Boy, every time I gave her a paper to read, she ripped it to shreds. But it was fun to have a biology teacher in the house when you were studying biology. My kids thought they had a biology teacher in the house with the dad as a veterinarian, only to recognize that in the 20 some odd years between my taking biology and their taking biology, the entire world had been disrupted. So genetics was a lot different in the 1970s than it was in the 2000s.
As compared to the 1950s?
Yes, exactly. In my house, my mother was probably the real matriarch. My dad was more quiet from that standpoint.
I'm not sure he was vying to be the matriarch in your house.
No, I don't think he could. My mom was the oldest child of a very dominant father and a very dominant brother, both of whom were doctors. And she would have probably been a doctor if women became doctors in the 1940s, but that was a much harder road to hoe. So she became a biology teacher instead. Or my dad actually used to joke that my mom was the only one who could keep my grandfather and her brother under control. She had no filters when it came to keeping her father and sibling under control. So she was a very strong woman from that standpoint.
I can't help but say this, but one of the roles of mothers is to keep their men under control. I think that is a common either responsibility or a common action. While you were talking, I was thinking about the roles of mothers, and it goes beyond that of the biological relationship between the mother and the child. In our society, and part of protecting the child, part of mothering, is to make sure that the environment is conducive to safety and growth, and education. And that means controlling the male influence in that environment, be it a brother, a father, or anybody else, regardless of gender, that may impact that environment. And the mothers that do that the best are the ones that are most successful. And the mothers and fathers who partner in that regard the best are usually considered the most successful. The roles of mothers tend to be limited to our personal relationships with our mothers. And we underestimate sometimes the skill they must impart in creating a nurturing atmosphere and the assorted talents that they must assimilate to handle complex personalities that we call children.
So your mother is still alive.
My
And
mother is still alive. She's 94 years old.
young.
She tells me every day she's old. Her favorite phrase, the old mare is not what she used to be. It is her phrase that she's always probably couldn't wait to use. I think she's lost on the idea that she's talking to a veterinarian when she uses that phrase. I don't think she appreciates the significance of that phrase to a veterinarian. And I haven't yet told her that in veterinary medicine, when the old gray mare ain't what they used to be, we shoot it.
Probably a good idea that you don't have that conversation with her, because even at 94, I am sure she can put you in your place.
Oh, needless to say, I'm sure that's the only reason that it's ever even come up in my mind while I was talking to you. And I am so happy that the fear of a higher power in this regard has kept me safe.
Yeah, well, I now have leverage, okay? Because even though your mom probably doesn't listen to podcasts all that much, trust me, I have this as leverage in case I need it at some point in time. So was your mom the matriarch as well?
So my mom was the perfect partner for my dad. My mom ruled the house until my dad came home. But she wasn't subservient to my dad. That was clear. But my dad loved her deeply, and that was clear. Yes, she was the matriarch, but not in the sense that she ran the house, but household matters were under her domain. She was a high school graduate. During my younger years, she went to college and tried to get her degree, but life got in the way. While she was trying to get her degree, they were also trying to advance economically, and they ended up buying a short order restaurant across the street from Jackson State University. And that essentially tabled all educational efforts in order to make that successful.
I didn't know about this short order restaurant. That's pretty cool.
How about that? I was in high school at the time that they purchased it in 1970. I was in the 10th grade and began to learn active management, personnel management as a result of that. Being the owner's son, my first job was to be the janitor of the restaurant and to pick up supplies and deliver them and stock them. And then I had to learn to cook, and work in the kitchen and to wait tables. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I was a manager of the restaurant. Cool. And my father was director of food service, so he had to have a arm's length relationship. He took care of the books, but he didn't want to be seen in the restaurant because of the apparent conflict of interest.
So you worked for your mom?
Yes, we worked for the family.
Yes, okay. Well put.
Yeah, and we actually worked for Dad. If there was a problem, eventually he was the one who found out that night and decided what to do. It was an interesting experience, but honestly, there were 3 populations that frequented that restaurant. In the morning, skilled labor would come in for breakfast. We would open at 6. Migrant labor, people who lived outside of Jackson, but who had carpentry jobs or plumbers, or they were building houses somewhere. They would come in and have breakfast. And that was the first time I saw people drinking beer at breakfast time. Different culture. And then by mid-morning, the clientele changed to the professors that were at Jackson State and the students at Jackson State, and they would come in for breakfast and or lunch. Then by mid-afternoon, the labor guild would return after they got off work to get another quart of beer before they were going home. And we would start serving dinner. And students would be trickling through starting around noon. And we would close at 11. And by 11, most of our clientele were students.
What was the best thing on the menu?
The best thing on the menu was a hot dog special.
All right.
2 hot dogs covered with slaw, and the slaw was covered with fries. And then the whole was drenched in a mild barbecue sauce.
That was a knife and fork plate.
And at the time that we had that, you could get that for 52 cents.
Did you say it was 25 cents for a beer?
No, I didn't. No. And red beans and rice was another typical Southern soul food. But the students loved the hot dogs. That was our most popular item. You got a vegetable, meat, and bread, and potatoes.
In one bite.
In one bite.
So you learned a lot besides being a child, but you learned a lot about people skills and leadership skills from your mom as well, I would assume, since she was, overseeing the success of the restaurant.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I also learned the role of protecting my mom, because some of the men that came in from the labor guild after a couple of quarts of beer suddenly thought she looked really good. I learned how to navigate different strata of society.
What was the demographics? It sounds like you had some lower class, some middle class, some students. Now, Jackson State, correct me if I'm wrong, is a historically Black university.
Correct.
So were the vast majority of the restaurant goers Black or Hispanic or white or
nearly 98% African American?
Okay.
If anybody else was probably lost or delivering something.
Got it. Yeah, my mom, when she stopped teaching full-time, I want to call it relief teaching, but that's not what they called it, where she would fill in for other teachers. She never taught me. Never taught me outside of the house, because she was always at a school district that was outside of where I was going to school. It's been interesting because when my dad died, I brought a lot of stuff out of New York, and a lot of stuff's in the garage, and I got stuff from when my mom was a teacher, and either awards that she won, awards that her students won, et cetera. So it's just been very cool seeing some of the historical stuff that was, before Peter. She then self-taught herself. There's nice redundancy, isn't there? She taught herself about jewelry and became an expert in the field of Elizabethan Victorian jewelry, and opened her own jewelry store. So like your mom having a store, my mom had her jewelry store downtown. And, it was not a place that my friends would go and hang out, because it's like, what is a high school kid looking at antique jewelry? But it's a great place for me to go if I ever needed a gift for a girlfriend.
Well, yes, that's amazing. I admire anybody I self-taught myself on tequila. So let me ask you a question. Tell me one of the more important lessons you attribute to learning from your mother.
I think what I learned from my mother is that when I told her I wanted to be a veterinarian, and she said, go for it. She said, don't let others tell you that you can't do it. Because should have become a doctor, but basically they told her that that's not what people did at that point in time. And in essence, when I was applying and thinking about going to undergrad and becoming a veterinarian, I think there were 15, maybe 18 veterinary schools. You had, when you were a New York resident, you really had one chance, and that was Cornell. It was a different mindset back then. And most of and I can remember my student counselor essentially saying, you probably just want to be a doctor. And my mom kept saying, you focus on what you want. So she was very strong on focus and direction and commitment and perseverance. And my grandfather, my mother's father, was a general practitioner, MD, classic Marcus Welby. The residence was on the second floor. The medical office was on the first floor. Used to make house calls, and he was a polio survivor. So one of his legs did not function. And so to be able to become that successful and that recognized in the communities as the doctor, and having had to deal with polio, I think between that and my mother's determination, it helped me keep my focus and my direction and my commitment. And I really didn't have an ulterior option. This is it. That's what I was going to do. And yeah, there may be some bumps in the road, but that's what my plans were. So I would suggest that probably the biggest message I got from my mom was keep your head down, keep moving towards your goal.
Good.
So I'll reverse the question. What would be your take home from your mom?
Well, the question was one of the more important lessons, because I know you learned more than that one. Right. And as a segue to yours, I'll talk about mine in a minute. My mother reacted a little differently. My father was the one who pushed me to be a veterinarian because he thought I was smart enough to be a doctor, but did not think we could overcome the socioeconomic barriers in the South, and wasn't sure enough to push me to be an MD. My mother had different ideas, but didn't say it. And I think she secretly hoped that I would just naturally rise, and I mean the word in elevation, to a more glorious degree, in her opinion. And I remember my veterinary mentor, Dr. Roland Powell, right after I graduated, he claims he met her in the grocery store right after, and said, "You must be so proud of your son." And she said, "I am." She said, "I just wish he had become a real doctor." She claims she doesn't remember that, but I do know that was the narrative I received from my mentor. And to be clear, that story reflects for me the impact of chronic microaggressions, outright bias, outright prejudice on the choices of young people. And I make no other judgment there. I've had a wonderful career as a veterinarian and do not regret the choice, and you can only be one thing at a time. So I made the choice, and I stand by it. One of the more important lessons I learned from my mother was the importance of integrity and honesty, and having your word as your bond. And that lesson, it was more than a chronic refrain from her. It actually came to a point for me. One day I was playing with my friends at a friend's house, and we lived on a dead-end street. But the first house on that off the main road, I was at that house playing. And at one point we were thirsty. And on the main road, about less than 2/10 of a mile down that road, there was a service station where we could buy snacks and drinks and things like that. But I wasn't supposed to get off the street unless I asked permission. But I decided it was too much trouble to run up to my house to get permission and then come back past the house I was in and then go to the service station. And that I knew how to navigate that road. This was before sidewalks and everything. And it was a pretty busy thoroughfare. But I knew I could get down there safely. I knew how to get down and get back. And I also thought I'd get back before anybody knew. So I went down and bought my pop and my snack and came back. And when I got back, my friends told me that my mother had been looking for me. And so I went up to the house to see what she wanted. And she said, "Where were you? Where have you been? Did you go to the store without telling me?" And I said, "No." And then she let me know that my friends had already ratted me out and that she knew I had lied to her. Well, at that point, I had only been caught in a lie. And I felt bad about getting caught in a lie, but I think I felt bad because I got caught. Later on, shortly thereafter, something happened at school and a teacher accused me of something. And when I got home, Mom said, "I understand you did." I don't even remember what the incident was, but whatever it was, I didn't do it. And I said, "Mom, I'm sorry, I didn't do that," etc. And she said, "Well, that's what Mrs. Lane says you did." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry, but she's mistaken. And why don't you believe me?" And in that moment, I suddenly realized the importance of integrity. And she said, "How can I believe you when you've lied to me before? You have to regain my trust." And it just so happened it was at a point when I truly was wrongly accused and realized that I had no basis to correct the error based on my character or based on the recent expression of my character. That was a defining moment for me.
So have you gone back to your mom and said, remember this? And I'm apologizing now, 50 some odd years later.
No, no, not now. I mean, we've had discussions earlier in my life with her. It's funny. I encourage everybody to go talk to their mother about their views or their versions of what happened. I don't know about you, but I've had students and even children. My children will tell me a story from their perspective that I don't remember, or I didn't think was that important, or the lesson that they learned wasn't the one I was trying to teach.
Yeah, it's really hard to think back. I lived at home until I went off to undergrad, and trying to think back to a lot of the details. All I know is I worked hard, studied hard, went to school, went to work, and a lot of the details and stories I wish I could remember. I go back, I've got thousands of pictures and slides and everything from times that we went on trips, and you try to filter back to specific events and specific things, just like you're telling the story. And it gets harder and harder every hour, every day, every week, because I think sometimes this hard drive called a brain starts to get filled with current events and loses older events. So a story like that, I'm sitting here trying to think of a comparable singular event, and I'm not sure if I have singular events as much as just that series of consistent coaching, for lack of a better way to put it, or support to help me have integrity and to know right from wrong and the like. So I'm really pushed to think of a singular event like you had that helped you develop one of your values. I think I just developed them over time from observation, from communication, and from experience.
Well, I'm not sure that your inability to generate one, even if you had one, is important. What's important is that you develop a sense of value,
Right.
a code of ethics.
Right.
And if it's through repetitive mentoring or repetitive examples, that's as effective or even more so. Maybe I remember this pinnacle event in my life because I was stubborn, or because I was headed in the wrong direction, and I was fortunate enough to get caught in a manner that underscored the importance of that particular value. It could also be that I have different perceptions of events, but needless to say, I did not want to go through that type of pain ever again.
Right.
It was clear to me that being trustworthy was an important part of my psyche, because I tend to be trusting, and I respect those that I can trust.
The word trust it's a very important word, and probably a separate conversation that we could segue into. But I think we both have had strong mothering without smothering.
Yes.
So I know that there's a lot of mother smothers that lead to their own series of Jerry Springer TV shows or whatever, Dr. Phil. But I think I had enough of a leash to make my own decisions and know not to pull on the leash too much. Honestly, I don't think I had a mother smother. And I think that's allowed me to, with my own kids, give them some leash, not full leash, but give them enough leash that they can develop their own skill sets as well.
Well, the role of mothers has not changed, but the activities of mothers have. And it's much more complicated now. It's much more challenging now. In a paternalistic society, which we grew up in, my mother took care of the house. During the summer months, there was no childcare, and a higher percentage of women were in the home. And my mother prepared meals and kept the home straight. But when it comes to whether or not I was on a leash or not, she was a very strict disciplinarian, and the partnership I talked about between her and my father was unbreakable. She had her own authority, but then she had the sheriff behind her, and we preferred that punishment would be doled out by her. But if it was bad enough, she would turn me over to my father. Or at a certain age, I remember once when she was spanking me, and I must have been 15 or 16, and I wasn't reacting the way, as if I was being hurt. And after that punishment, she just told me, "You belong to your father now." And all of a sudden, the relationship changed. If I messed up, wait till your father gets home. That was part of growing up for me. Suddenly, I didn't have a mother to protect me. I had a mother that was turning me in. So I realized I better do what she said do if I didn't want to deal with my father.
So here we are almost 2 years into our courageous conversations. And I think it's the first time we've actually talked about an area of courageous conversations that we can message, which is the courageous conversation that you have with your parents. We talked about kids, the talk and everything else.
Yeah.
But, the courageous conversations that you have with your parents. And I retrospectively wish I had more courageous conversations with my mom that weren't focused on tangible things, but were more focused on global things, and maybe learning some of her right brain type approaches to things, because we were both very left brain heavy from being in the sciences. But I think there's a message that basically says, while you can and when you can, don't forget to integrate your parents into your courageous conversations.
I think that's a good point. And I think you have to be a lot more courageous than just you and I having that exchange. I have to tell you, the hairs went up on the back of my neck while you were talking as I tried to insert. Now, and it's not as if I haven't had those conversations. I have. But the older we get, meaning my mother and I, the more difficult these conversations become. First of all, our age differences insert a degree of difference in perspectives and experiences from those perspectives from the experiences that each of us have had, that even the common experiences are seen differently. As I said before, when I tell my mom about something, she says, "Well, that's not how I remembered it." And yet we went through the same experience, but we went through it from different perspectives. Now imagine discussing microaggression, which wasn't even a word when she was being raised. It wasn't even a word, a socially accepted word. It wasn't even recognized as an issue while she was raising us. So how do you have that discussion with your mother if she's not keeping up?
Well, I just want to wish all the mothers who are listening to this a happy Mother's Day, whether you hear it before Mother's Day or after Mother's Day. And for those of you who have still have your moms, give them a call, go visit them. And for those of us who don't forget to think about them and think about all the things you wish you had said to them.
I too want to wish happy Mother's Day to all the mothers, particularly mine. And I want to urge all the children that have mothers, which is all of us, to recognize that this is a special day for a special person.
And just another thank you to Nationwide for their support and giving us the platform to share these courageous conversations and talk about mom. So till next time, Phil, thanks.
All right, man.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.